Hello, everybody. My name is Shane Gerard, and I am the Bureau Director for Alcohol and Drug Addiction Services for the Mississippi Department of Mental Health. And I am here today to share with you some different language and different ideas that we have on the Golden Thread training, but also to make sure that we're all ready to go when the new things come out and we are using the language that we need for our site visits. So we'll get started. And of course, we are the Alcohol and Drug Addiction Services for the entire state of Mississippi. And what we want to talk about today, more than anything else, is language. So when we're talking about different things on treatment plans or progress notes or any of the things that we'll be talking about today, we really want to talk about fluid movement. And, you know, this is going to be something that'll go across all of the treatment areas at some point or another, but right now it's really focused in alcohol and drugs. So some of the things that we're going to talk about today would be the ASAM criteria. I know all of you have started to hear about it. We have done quite a few trainings. We have a lot more trainings coming, and I'll talk a few minutes about it in just a little bit. We also have the stages of change, and I know y'all heard about it over and over. We do it in a lot of different trainings. But when we're talking treatment plans and talking progress notes and goals of short-term and long-term, then we really want to talk about the stage that that person is in. And if we have the ability to talk about the stage that they're in, then all of a sudden we meet criteria of what SAMHSA is looking for. All of these things that I'm talking about today are our ideas right now, but they actually come from SAMHSA. So we want to be able to create this continuum of care, the continuum of change for an individual, and have that fluid movement of that person going from one stage to the next. So you'll hear me mention those things, which are ASAM criteria, stages of change, continuum of care, and fluid movement throughout this whole presentation. It will actually enhance the first presentation. I'm not going through everything like the first presentation will go through. I'm going through what changes we'll be looking specifically for alcohol and drugs. So we'll jump right on into it, and let's talk just a second about some of the assessments that we do. And with the adults, we do the DLA 20. So what we're looking for in the DLA 20 is it gives us our actual ideas for treatment plan, strengths, behaviors, impairments, needs, barriers. It can go through all of those things to help you formulate what ASAM criteria they need. We're also going to have a treatment plan that will be ready. It's not ready quite yet, but it will be ready, that will actually give you the ASAM criteria once you do the intake on that individual. So it is forthcoming of what that looks like, and it is something that we have to do. We have to be able to show SAMHSA that this is how that person is fluid movement. I know we have been stuck so long, and you know that person comes in and does 30 days of care, 28 days of care, but that is something that is of the past, and we're going to be moving past that. So this is the spot, you know, where we start saying, you know, we hate change, but change has got to be something that we do. So I mentioned before that we have ASAM levels of care trainings. They are also available right here at MSPHI. They're going to do 3 or 4 of them early this year, but we'll also be doing some at DMH to make sure everybody understands what it is that we're talking about. That placement can't be that, you know, they come in and they do residential care because we don't have IOP. We've got to be able to find an IOP for them if that's the level of care they need to be in. So I know that's a change in thinking, that's a change in idea, but it is something that we have to do to be able to paint this complete picture of that person and what are the needs that they need from us, and then how do we pay for that treatment to do it. So the golden thread itself, when I start talking about what influences that person when he comes into treatment. So I want to know what is warm and welcoming. I shouldn't say just he, because it's he or she. One of the keys behind what we want to do in our preparation of the golden thread is how do we allow peer support to be a part of this? How do we allow the warm and welcoming person that meets them at the front door before the assessment starts to help them feel more comfortable in what it is that they want to talk about? If you think the way our mental health centers are set up right now, they're really kind of separated and not a part of. Peer support really should be a part of that to help that person begin to understand that, I'm here for help and these people want to help me. They desire to help me. If you're just stuck outside a glass window, do you really want to help me? I don't think you would really want to help me if you had to sit me down in a lobby for 2 hours before you talk to me. I also want to talk real quick before we start the golden thread about trauma responses. So when I start thinking of how that person is reacting to me, around me, it could be space, it could be nonverbal cues, it could be all different kind of things that are telling me this person has got something else going on. And, for me as a clinician, one of the things that I have got to pick up on pretty quick is how do I help that person be more comfortable in just talking to me. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we talk about cultural factors. When I hear people talk about cultural factors, it's usually this big thing. Well, that's not necessarily the case when we're talking about trying to get the information that we need so that we can help that person and formulate a goal together. So I think if we take our time here and really understand the family dynamic, how that person has reacted around peer support, what responses they have, all of that adds into that cultural factors of can I help this person? Can I meet that person exactly where they are? And you social workers out there, have heard it pounded into you over and over and over. This is how I go where they are. So I just want to make sure that we touch on that before we really get into the golden thread of understanding that I won't get the complete picture and my treatment plan will fail miserably if they are not completely intertwined in this. And all of those things have to come into play for them to be intertwined in it. So when I start thinking of the building of one after another, I'm building this idea that we can do something together. Confidence is strength. I start thinking of the keys and the strengths that's got to be in place. And these are something that I start building on before the assessment ever starts. So let's talk about need for a minute. What is the immediate crisis of that person coming into care, whether it's outpatient care, whether it's residential care? Well, what does that person need from me right then? Because if I don't start solving that immediate problem, then I'll lose them pretty quick. That does not mean there's not underlying problems. I want to make sure that we talk about that underlying problem over and over because it is there and it is something that we have to discuss, but not right off the bat. Right off the bat, it's usually a crisis that's going on, and the crisis is what got them there. So I can usually change that pretty quick when I start thinking of the needs of that person. What do you need from me? How do I help you get to that spot? And, I like talking about it when I do trainings of what if the person just wanted to not drive drunk? They didn't want to stop drinking. They just wanted to stop driving drunk. How do you create a treatment plan to help that person? That goes with them. What do you need? Is that living your best life? Is that something that you want to do? Is that what you desire? And if it is, am I standing in your way or am I standing beside you? So just thinking about what does that look like on my next stage. So this is their best life of what they want to talk about. And here's how I move from one stage to the next. Maybe we get to the point of they don't want to drink anymore, or maybe we don't. Maybe we get to the point to where we have a really good plan of not driving drunk anymore. What do they desire out of life? I have asked that question so many times with people, and they're like, what do you mean, what I desire out of life? People who have alcohol and drug abuse problems sometimes forget that they have dreams. They have started relying on the substance so much that it's not something that they've even thought about anymore. So, I want you to think about that as we're looking at what do they desire, what do they want, how do I help them? And then the stage of change will allow the person to build confidence and they can see it on paper. So when you lay that stage of change out for them and they're able to start seeing that movement, then that movement is something that gives them that next impactful thing that says, I can do the next thing. And maybe that's the next treatment attempt, or maybe it's 6 weeks into treatment. Who knows? We get through the crisis first, we find out what they desire and want out of life, and we help them build their best life. So what brought them to you? How is it impacting their life? So if they were driving drunk, Of course, it impacts their life because they went to jail. They may have lost their license. They could have lost their job. They could have all different kind of things going on. So how do I understand what their problem is? What is the key understanding for me? Is it that I'm still stuck on this stone, that they have to do this? Or is it that I'm ready to move forward in my own beliefs so that I can help them live their best life? So what is priority? Priority, of course, if they've got law enforcement issues, is getting the law enforcement issues resolved. Sometimes that's a real simple fix, and sometimes that's a really hard fix. It doesn't mean you get them out of trouble, but it could mean that you help them find ways to not get in any more trouble. And it could come with a deciphering of what is it that's really going on. So, you know, I think back to a client that I had that had paranoid schizophrenia, and his medication was causing severe side effects. And those severe side effects, he found marijuana to fix those. Well, he was about to go to prison. Nobody had asked him why you smoked marijuana. What did it do for you? Nobody even mentioned that to him. I saw it on his chart as soon as he got the treatment. And I started talking to him about going in and see a psychiatrist and talking about different medications. And he had tried, but had failed miserably at it because he didn't know how to talk to him. So I think about that and I go, his priority was to knock down the side effects that he was having from paranoid schizophrenia. And the medication was knocking him unconscious, so he couldn't function in life. So his priority was functioning in life, even if it had to be going to prison. So what is the priority of that person? Of course, we want to think really quick about, you know, health and safety, legal, harm reduction, people to be with, independence. All those things are a good start. But they still don't get me to that part unless I ask him, unless I'm talking to him, unless we become a conversation together. And I think really and truly that is what we're talking about when we're looking at the golden thread in its wholeness, is how do we put these things together so that that person can live his best life, he or she. What quality of life does a person desire? That may not match mine. You know, when I think of the quality of life, is it my quality of life that I'm thinking of, or is it their quality of life? I think their desire is that part that we don't put enough emphasis on. When the first presentation, when they're going through all of these different ideas, I just want you to think about the person who has been abusing substances, because it changes in your mind just a little bit from one thing to the next. And then they're intertwined from mental health disorders to substance use disorders. And then you really look at can we do that? What supports do they have? If the desire is high but the supports are not there, how do we build support so that they can have it? So, you know, we start looking at all of those different ideas of what we need to do to help that person get to that next stage. So barriers, what is in the way? I start thinking of barriers in a different light when I look at cultural factors. We think we know barriers, but think of barriers that have been in your life. What stops you from doing something? A lot of times that has to do with people to help. So I would love to build a shed in my backyard, but guess what? I can't do it right now. Why can't I do it? Well, one thing is we're in the middle of a pandemic. Money would be a problem. Getting help to help build the shed would be a problem because of the pandemic and all the other things that we have going on. So those barriers keep me from doing that. What barriers keep you from doing things? And sometimes that helps us see what barriers are keeping them from doing something. So I think about life skills. Do you know how to do it? If you do know how to do it, is it something that's easy or hard, or something that I will continue on? What if I've never had the skill before in my life? You know, how do you work on a computer if you don't know how to work on a computer? So the life skills are a big deal, and they are one of those things that some of us take for granted because we learned them as we were growing up, but some people didn't. Some people never had that. Some people's life skills were stealing. I was a really good thief when I was out using. So I think of that life skill. That was a skill that I had, but it wasn't very useful when I got to be an adult. So what about resources itself? You know, it says, hey, we go out and we get a job and become successful. I think of drug courts in this way. Drug courts say that person's supposed to get a job within the first month and learn how to work. What if I've never had a job or done an interview or talked to anybody? What if those resources are not available to me? What if they've never been available to me? So now all of a sudden we've got a unique problem with someone that doesn't really know what he's got to do to move forward. And then, of course, in our culture of alcohol and drug use, a lot of times everyone that I know gets high, or everybody that I know does the same thing. Well, how do you break out from somewhere where you don't know anybody else? This is particularly interesting to me because as I talk to people who abuse substances, I see this a lot. And of course, the recovery community is great, but it is really hard to go into a meeting and share that I'm a drug addict. I didn't want to do it. You know, thank goodness I did, and there's so many different ways to get clean, but I start thinking of how hard is that when you don't know anybody except for people who abuse substances. Everybody's doing the same thing. So how do I break out when I go to treatment, I get clean, I feel better about myself, and then I go back out and everybody on my block does it and I don't have the resources to go anywhere else or the skills to know how to do it. So these things are all playing into what is stopping this person from treatment. And I know in our treatment plans, a lot of times we list block things right here because we get tired of doing writing, but this is super important so that I can go back and show the person, remember, here's some of the barriers that we said, and here's some of the barriers that we have to get through. And of course, comorbidity with all of this. So, you know, I really don't see people who abuse substances who only have substance use disorder. A lot of times they have depression, anxiety, and the 100 other ones that come along with it, which take the problem and make it just a little bit bigger. Of course, some of the barriers that get in the way we talked about on the last slide, the health and safety. You know, we don't really think about that when we're using, but it is a part of it. And of course, the one that we don't talk about the most is the fight, flight, and freeze. So a lot of times that person has abused their fight, flight, and freeze so much that they have become entangled with this is how I react all the time. A lot of times we call them resistant to treatment because they throw a fit or they get upset or, you know, in the intake they holler at mama or they do whatever, and you start thinking of this is who they've been for the last however many years they've done it. How do you calm down and think your way through something when everything has been a fight? Everything has been running away or everything has been just freeze up and don't say anything, you know. That's my protection. And of course, we understand the release of cortisol and what happens there. And when I start thinking of that release, then we start thinking of someone who has abused that cortisol so much that it no longer does what it's supposed to do. So we end up running or we end up doing physical damage to our body. I don't mean to get wrapped up in our fight, flight, and freeze, but we don't talk about it enough because usually that's the person that goes, well, they're resistant to treatment. They really don't want treatment right now, so why don't you come back when you want something? It's not that they don't desire it, it's that they don't know how to react any other way. So those are some of the barriers, especially in the beginning or just in the intake process itself, before I even start building anything, to know that these are the things that are getting in the way for people with substance use issues. And of course, when we start discussing the course of treatment, I love when we talk about readiness for change. When are you ready for change? When does change happen with you? So, you know, I look at myself, for instance, and how unhappy I am with my size and how I wish that I'd weighed a little bit more. My readiness for change doesn't say that I'm ready to look healthy, because I like to eat cheeseburgers. I like to eat pizza. I like to eat things that you're not supposed to eat, and I don't like to eat healthy. So where's my readiness for change? When does that change in you, and how can someone help you do that? If we start to understand that, then we start to understand the level of change that person is, that readiness for change that person is. So I love to talk about it because when we're discussing it, especially with therapists, sometimes our mouth gaps open because, what do you mean we're not talking about me? if you'll turn it back to you, you can see how difficult it is for them. So if we went back to that other slide and we had no resources and that person was going back to home and we say their readiness for change when they left treatment was great, but as soon as they got to their house, it deteriorated to nothing. It deteriorated because we didn't use a fluid movement to help them along the way. So when I start thinking of ASAM criteria and the fluid movement, that's where that person should be in care, so that they do some testing, so that they go outside to the house and they figure out, hey, I don't have anybody, and how do I connect with new people that are in recovery? So those levels of care are the things that are going to help me move from one to another. So for instance, I needed residential care in the beginning because my drug use was so bad and I needed to be removed from the environment. So I got removed from the environment. I went to treatment for 90 days. And those 90 days were some of the best days of my life. And I met some friends in treatment that really felt like they cared and needed. And then the treatment provider just sent them home and said, we want you to do aftercare. And you come meet with us once a month, and then we're going to do group every other week. And so we didn't ask them what they needed. We said what we had to offer them. And that's the difference in where we're talking about on our old ideas and new ideas of ASAM levels of care. How does that person move fluidly? How does that person go home and then realize that, I didn't need to be home right now. There are some targets that I need to hit before I go there, and come back into treatment, or move to a transitional level of care of treatment, or move to an IOP that's meeting 3 days a week. Whatever that person needs to help that person move from one stage to the next. And now all of a sudden, we have this fluid across the board, and that person is able to get whatever it is that they need from us to live the life that they really want to live. And it gives proper treatment throughout treatment. So the thread itself, let's link it. Let's talk about it just for a second. So assessment, service plan, progress note, levels of care, stages of change. So it's a simple concept when I think about locking all of it together. So the assessment, which could be the DLA 20, is one of the ones that we have, and the service plan, which is going to include your short and long-term goals, your progress notes. So all of these things now need to be linked. They don't have to necessarily be linked all the time, because you're going to have crises that come up, but they need to be linked most of the time. If you have more than a couple different weeks that we're not talking about what it is that we've got to do, then we need to change some of the assessment or the service plan. Did the short and long-term goals change as we went through treatment? Most of the time they do. In reality, most people, when they come into residential treatment, say, I want to stop using substances. It's not necessarily that easy. What else has to change in it to get to the part of not using substances anymore, which could be the long-term goal. But short-term goals have to be a little bit shorter and something that's more focused, so that I begin to build my strengths. They may not have very many strengths when they get there, but that whole part of they don't believe it, now all of a sudden I will believe it, and I have more strengths that I can list. And I actually will list them on the treatment plan as I go. And then, of course, the progress notes have got to follow everything. Progress notes, group notes, it all goes back to that assessment or to the service plan, or are we meeting the goals that we need? I will be a little bit stern in a few minutes when we start talking about if they're not meeting those goals, because that is not the person's problem. That is the therapist's problem most of the time. We don't want to stop and rewrite things. We want to say that person is not making progress in their treatment. They're not making progress because we haven't spent enough time with them to understand that these are the goals, and we need to change some of those because their ideas of the goals have changed. And then, of course, when I look at the progress notes itself, the SAP format, when I'm looking at SAP, I'm looking at that person to change from one note to the next. If they're not changing, what do we need to change? Not necessarily what do they need to change. It may have changed completely. One of their goals may have been, I want to graduate residential care. I've never completed anything, and I want to complete it. So that could be a short-term goal. Well, I also have to be stern with them. What are they doing to get through residential treatment? What does it take to get through residential treatment? I was writing a note with a peer support, trying to help them understand what a peer support note kind of looked like. And one of the goals that I was setting in with them, one of the goals the person wanted to do is be a professional football player. Well, the peer support specialist laughed at him. I was like, well, what did you laugh for? And they're like, well, we'd all love to go make millions of dollars. And I was like, but what does he have to do to get there? What does it take to be a professional football player? It takes a lot of exercise. It takes size. It takes strength. Usually have to be young, but not necessarily. So all of a sudden you start listing that, and you have a belief then. You have a belief and they have a belief that, hey, these short steps can get me to that big step of wanting to go try out for the Professional Football League, the NFL. So, I think this is all in the mindset right here of the therapist and the intake coordinator, whoever's actually completing the paperwork, so that it's not just paperwork. It is the person's treatment. I can come in and I can look at this and go, wow, y'all really did some work. This individual moved from one stage to the next and then figured out that short-term goal was not something he wanted to do, and backed up and did another one. So all of those things come with our levels of care, stages of change, fluid movement. That person's moving from one to another and figuring out that that's not something I want to do, or that's not something that I can achieve right now. I see people come into treatment all the time that want to go back to college. That's great, and it could be a long-term goal, but that's not necessarily something that they could complete right then. But you want them to figure that out, not you tell them they can't do it. So you start laying out, what does it take to do that? How do you fill out your grant money? How do you make sure that you have a school that you can go to? Where will you live? All of those things that have to do with the person completing that task that they want to complete. Notice we really didn't talk about alcohol and drug addiction there, because that's not part of our conversation. These are our goals. We want to build a life that I don't have to use substances with. Build a life that I can be proud of and that I love. And when I do that, substance use doesn't necessarily have as much power over me as it did. So the service plan itself, action, what are the obstacles, barriers that stand in that action from me? When I start thinking of the service plan itself, it has to be something that we're building together. What holds us back? Do they have hope talk in it? I love using motivational interviewing here, these small tests of change that you can commit to. I like looking at that with my weight again. What can I do that helps me not eat as much? I love red can Coca-Colas. So one of the things that I like to do, or that I did, is stop drinking red can Coca-Colas, and I start drinking more water. Now, every once in a while, I'll splurge on the weekend and get me a red can Coke. I think that's okay, but that is the part that I can understand, these small tests that I can commit to. I can do that, and all of a sudden, the quit drinking them completely is not on the list. It is, I can have one if I want one. I just don't desire to have one right now. And then document everything. Remember, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. I know I'm talking to you like this fluid movement, because that's what it should be. This assessment and all the things that are going to come along with it, with my goals and ideas, all of it has to come together as this person's treatment. This is not just paperwork that we're talking about. This is the person's life that we're documenting. And that will help them as we go back and look and go, here's what you said you were going to do, and here's what you did. So, the reality is you can do it because you're doing it right now. And that part of it gives them something that you normally can't give somebody. So the last thing I want to talk about is the journey itself. So the journey itself comes in your progress notes. What does it look like on a progress note? The journey through care, which is the fluid movement of the person that is moving from ASAM criteria to ASAM criteria, but also with language of the stages of change. All of it's linking back to the plan, but all of it has to be laid out in a progress note. As we talked about earlier, the progress note will be the key behind I follow everything that person is doing. That person's going to have ups and downs in care, whether it's outpatient or residential, whether it's IOP or even a medicated assisted treatment facility. So I start thinking of the care that person needs. Here's their continuum. Here's how that person moved fluid in there, and here's how I document it on a progress note. If I have the ability to talk about those things, and I have it documented of why that person is in that stage of change they are, or in that ASAM criteria they are, then all of a sudden the person's life is laid out through the assessment itself, through the journey itself. It links back to to the goals, and all of it's documented through the progress notes. So the one big idea now all of a sudden comes in, and we can see that person's life, and we can see how they moved, and then they can see how they moved from one to the next. So I hope my presentation was helpful. I do have some contact information on this next slide, which is if you have any questions. We do have some forthcoming trainings. You're going to have some for ASAM criteria. You're also going to have some in stages of change. We're going to make sure you understand all that language, and we want to make sure that we're ready for SAMHSA to come back. They will come back for another site visit, and we're going to be ready for them because all of you are rock stars. And this whole part of what you do and how you've helped in this pandemic has been unbelievable to me. So I'm so proud of y'all, so proud to be a part of it, and so proud to understand that we're going to change this together. So if you have any questions, B is my person, so Belen White. Her number is 601-359-6220, and that is belen.white@dmh.ms.gov, and it is on the slide, so you can see it. I just wanted to mention it too. Thank you so much for your time.